Let's talk about Deshaun Watson.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints. Fresh week here, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that we are free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, USA Today's Saints Wire, Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at betonline.net. You can go ahead and find everything that you need because they've got you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Tell you more about them later on, but today's episode is going to be all about Deshaun Watson. We're going to talk about the complicated history here. We're going to talk about the compensation, and we're going to talk about what it would take to the other pieces in terms of what it would take to get a quarterback like Deshaun Watson, or at least even trading for a quarterback to New Orleans. So I want to start off here with the complicated conversation, right? And so let's hit this first. In case you've missed it, the New Orleans Saints, the Carolina Panthers reportedly have either submitted trade offers or at least started to have conversations about potential trade compensation to bring quarterback Deshaun Watson to their franchise as their potentially franchise-altering quarterback. The conversation around the compensation we'll get to in a moment, but we should also mention that over the course of the next 48 hours, Deshaun Watson is expected to meet with both the New Orleans Saints, the Carolina Panthers, as well as other teams as well. So just a quick clarifying thing when you hear conversations around this, we talk about the Saints and the Panthers being the two teams that have entered trade talks, I guess you can say, with the Houston Texans, but it doesn't mean that they are the market, right? There are other teams like the Indianapolis Colts, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Seattle Seahawks that probably also make up the market, but either haven't yet submitted trade offers or it's not public that they've submitted trade offers, right? So there's a lot of different ways to look at all this. But the complicated sort of part of all this isn't just down to the compensation in the market. It's down to this uncomfortable conversation that has to be had anytime that Deshaun Watson's name comes up. Now, there was a criminal trial last week, 9 criminal accusations that were lobbied against Deshaun Watson that did not lead to charges have now been moved on from. So now there's 22 civil cases that are still open, though, against Deshaun Watson from what has been described as a pattern of predatory sexual misconduct. Now, here's where I want to preface. I'm going to say some things right. I'm going to say some things wrong. I'm going to go too far for some people. I'm not going to go far enough for other people. That's okay. Hold me accountable whenever, however you want to. Totally fine. But I'm willing to take the risk. But what I will tell you is that I'm going to do my best to navigate this conversation and have this conversation and continue to have it, because I think too often we in sports tend to acknowledge something like this the first time we talk about the player and then never acknowledge it again. And that's just not something that I feel comfortable with in this specific situation. And so I think that this should continue to be a part of Deshaun Watson's story, whether he finds success, whether he finds failure, whether he is just kind of a middle of the road quarterback for the rest of his career, whatever it's going to be. Success, probably most likely. He's a fantastic football player, but does that mean that we should ignore all of these other pieces? And I know we do that a lot in sports. We've done it with several players around the NFL that I'm sure are already coming to your mind. We've done it with several players in the NBA, so on and so forth. It is the habit of sports to erase the negative pieces of someone's story. I don't necessarily believe, in respect to the fact that there are several fans out there, and probably the majority of fans, that have been either directly or indirectly impacted by sexual misconduct, sexual assault, or sexual abuse of some kind. And whether that is because it has happened to them or because they know somebody that was victimized, the conditions don't matter. Deshaun Watson's very name has a negative impact on people that have experiences that are akin to what are described in those 22 civil cases. Whether you like that or not, it doesn't matter. Whether I like that or not, it doesn't matter. It is the truth. that is the way that this whole situation ends up impacting people that have non-universal experiences to those that haven't been impacted by these situations. And so for me, as someone that gets the opportunity to sit in front of a microphone every day and speak to all of you, right? It is important to me that I maintain some level of integrity while still having these conversations. And so for me, it is important that that continues to be a part of the story when it comes to Deshaun Watson. And whether or not he ends up in New Orleans, outside of my control, I'm not going to go anywhere. If he ends up in New Orleans, it's not like I'm going to run away and start reporting on another team or something like that, or analyzing another team. I'm not going to do that, right? Like, I am here as your host of Locked On Saints, and I will be here with you every Monday through Friday, regardless of what moves any team makes. So, hello, here I am. And I just wanted to acknowledge that this is a complicated situation and that it is one that I will do my very best to navigate in a way that is not going to end up violating the experiences of people who have experienced trauma that is relevant to this situation. And who knows, we might get 3 months down the road and find out that Deshaun Watson was completely innocent of all 22 of these accusations, as wild as that would be. On the equal side, it's equally likely that you go, 3 months and you find out something else, or it all gets settled out of court or whatever. But the main thing for me is that we don't just see this and then say, okay, well, that doesn't matter because it's not on the football field. It matters. It matters. And it impacts the locker room. It impacts engagement with fans. It impacts the relationship between the organization and the fan base, so on and so forth. And no one needs to be criminalized around this, by the way, for the way that they feel around this, right? Like, people that feel that Deshaun Watson don't want Deshaun Watson to be their favorite team's quarterback so that they don't have to weigh their decision of enjoyment and integrity are not bad people. They're not wrong. They just don't want to see that. And people that don't care whether or not Deshaun Watson is their quarterback simply don't care. And it's not a situation in which anybody needs to be criminalized here. It's just a situation in which everybody does not have the same experience. And therefore, people will see things in a different way. It doesn't make someone less of a fan. It doesn't mean that someone just doesn't want to win. It doesn't mean that people are okay with mediocrity or whatever. It's just simple. And that's all that it needs to be in the midst of something that is already so complex and so complicated. A couple of things that I want to mention. The New Orleans Saints, as well as several other teams around the NFL, are doing their own investigations into all of these accusations, these charges, all these things. So NFL teams may be getting information that isn't public, right? So if an NFL team says we're comfortable, just like they did with, like the New Orleans Saints did with Carl Granderson, they said that they were comfortable with where everything was based upon their further investigation of the situation, then that's just simply what it is. Teams might be more comfortable with the information that they have, which is likely more than the information that the public has, especially if things end up getting settled out of court, which could mean that things get sealed, and therefore the general public learns nothing else about this case, those cases, if that ends up being the way that things are handled and sort of put to bed moving forward. However, that doesn't mean that the New Orleans Saints don't have the power to get some additional information based upon their own individual investigations. And investigation is another big piece of all of this too, because there's the court of the law and then there's the court of the NFL. And we've seen it over and over again that the NFL will end up suspending players even if they don't end up receiving any type of legal discipline in the justice system, right? There's two different pieces to all of this. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about trade compensation, all of that, and how all those things are intertwined. But I am here to tell you that I will do my absolute best around this whole situation and around this with respect to the people that are most impacted by this. So my hope is that as I continue to cover this story, and if Deshaun Watson ends up being a New Orleans Saint, that I will continue to cover this story in its entirety, as opposed to just kind of putting blinders on and looking at it from the football only perspective. So there's our look at the complicated part of all of this, right? How it potentially impacts a fan base, how it potentially impacts your organization, so on and so forth. Is it going to be a distraction? Those things remain to be seen. Now we will shift gears and we'll take a look at this from what it would cost the New Orleans Saints to even get Deshaun Watson in New Orleans, and is it worth it from the trade compensation side? Let's talk about that as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market. We're halfway through March, so I hope that you're holding on to those New Year's resolutions and doing well. I have already slipped up on 2 of mine. I always do 2 because I go with like a really hard one and then I go with an easy one. My easier one was to eat healthy, get fit, all those things. And thankfully I've had Built Bar to help me get that done, especially the Built Bar Puffs. If you haven't tried those out yet, you're talking about the first protein-infused marshmallow. Fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They are not just a protein bar, they are a treat, and you're going to absolutely love them if you haven't tried them yet. Some great flavors, including churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. Go and check them out, as well as all of those fantastic Built Bars that you already know and love, like mint brownie, coconut almond, peanut butter brownie. Every one of these covered in 100% chocolate, but you're only talking about 4 or 5 grams of sugar, 4 or 5 grams of net carbs, so you're getting 17 grams of protein. So go and check them out over at built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15 so you can get 15% off of your next order. That is 15% off with the promo code LOCKED15 at built.com. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all platforms here with you 5 days a week. Want to make sure, too, that you're checking out that Locked On NFL YouTube page. All the biggest stories broken down by the local experts, 30 minutes or less over at Locked On NFL. You can find them wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube as well. So we talked about in the first segment how sort of complex this situation around Deshaun Watson is, and I made mention of my personal feeling around the trade for Deshaun Watson not necessarily being worth it. And some of that has to do with a lot of it has to do with the complicated history that is currently still active. Maybe once all those things subside, things would be a little bit easier, but as they are still active, it complicates the situation. But then there's the trade compensation part of it. And listen, I am very much of the less need school of F these picks, and that's very much how I feel around draft picks. Trade them. Bring in proven commodities, things like that. But when you're talking about trading 3 first-round picks, a pair of seconds, and a quality player, which will probably mean a starter either on the offensive line or defense for the New Orleans Saints, is that price too steep when it comes to getting a potentially franchise-altering quarterback? Now, you look at Deshaun Watson and the weapons that he had in Houston. There was a struggling offensive line there, not a very good defense, but you had DeAndre Hopkins. And with that, he went, 11-4 one season, 10-5 another season, and then had a couple of other subpar winning record seasons, not statistical seasons. And to the point to where the last season that he played for the Houston Texans before not playing in 2021, basically, as J.J. Watt and he walked off the field at the end of the Week 17 game, J.J. Watt went so far as to apologize him for wasting his time. And so we know that Deshaun Watson brings some talent, but he's also needs to have talent around him as well. And that makes sense for any quarterback, right? You could be a great quarterback, but you still need somebody to throw to. Not everybody's going to be Drew Brees turning undrafted free agents into, career receiving, 7th round picks or undrafted free agents into, all-time franchise record career receiving leaders. You know what I mean? And so you can't have that expectation for any quarterback that you're bringing in new to a system. And so when you're giving up 3 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, let's just say a couple of second-round picks, probably some more potential trade compensation, and a starter or a quality player, I think really the question is, who is that starter? Who is that quality player? Who are the proven commodities that you're giving up at the same time as your chances of creating those proven commodities or bringing in and developing those proven commodities through draft stock? Again, couldn't care less about giving away the draft capital, right? If you want a first-round pick, you can get a first-round pick. We'll see what happens with Sean Payton, right? There's a chance that Sean Payton comes back, wants to coach, then that means that the Saints get to trade him, and they probably get at least a first-round pick back for Sean Payton, potentially 2. So you end up having a bunch of ways that you can regenerate draft capital. That doesn't matter. But who's the player? And so some of the names that have come up in terms of potential players that could be moved in this deal make me feel very much one way or the other about the deal itself. If we're talking about, and one of the names that came up very early per Aaron Wilson, who you can actually hear over on Friday's Locked On Texans, and this Friday, upcoming's Locked On Texans, if you want to hear more from him, fantastic resource. He talks about Ryan Ramczyk potentially being part of the deal. That's rough. That is a rough loss to take when you already run the potential of Teron Armstead being signed away somewhere. Remember, the NFL legal tampering period is now open. As I'm recording this, it is now open, which means Teron Armstead can sign or agree to terms to sign anywhere over the course of the next couple of days. And if Deshaun Watson isn't meeting with the Saints or the Panthers until in other teams over the course of the next 48 hours, you might be too late in terms of retaining a Teron Armstead. You might be too late in terms of making a move for a Jameis Winston, so on and so forth. So if you're going to give up Ryan Ramczyk and potentially lose Teron Armstead, then what's the offensive line that you put in front of any quarterback, let alone Deshaun Watson, right? And then you have at least weapons, or at least one for the first 6 games. We don't know what's going to happen with Alvin Kamara. And then there's the lingering suspension question around, again, the court of the law versus the court of the NFL when it comes to Deshaun Watson. Are you really willing to give up all of that trade capital to go the first 6 games potentially without your star quarterback and your star running back? I don't know if you are. I don't know if you can be. So I think you have to get an idea of all of those things before you even so much as make, a move here, obviously. Now, if you're talking about younger players, things like that, and Cesar Ruiz is a part of this trade along with maybe, say, Erik McCoy, then I think maybe things are a little bit easier. The Saints have always struggled with protection on the interior. If Erik McCoy ends up being the trade piece, you can move Cesar Ruiz back to his natural position at center and then have Calvin Throckmorton plug in, James Hurst plug in at right guard, or you end up having, you can go to the draft and you don't need a first-round pick to find an interior offensive lineman in this year's draft. You can go 3rd, 4th round. So that makes it a little bit easier. Another instance would be a defensive piece. And the only defensive piece that I would say that has a tradable contract that should be made untouchable by the New Orleans Saints is C.J. Gardner-Johnson. You're not really going to be able to trade Marshawn Lattimore because of his contract, which, by the way, was just restructured and saved $18 million for the New Orleans Saints. That's kind of the same reason that Ryan Ramczyk doesn't make any sense, because he carries $37.7 million of dead cap because you just restructured his contract to make a ton of salary cap space. So those are the other things too. Who have the tradable contracts. Now, there are defensive players like Zach Bond that I think could be used to sweeten the deal, because I do think that Zach Bond fits better in other systems than he does in the Saints defensive system. There are those other players too that are, like Cesar Ruiz, who's still on a rookie contract. That would be an easily movable piece for you that doesn't cost you a bunch of dead money, and that you could, find another option to replace on the interior a little bit easier than you can find the offensive tackle. But I do enjoy Nick Underhill's point that it's easier to replace an offensive tackle, or generally any position around a team, than it is to replace the quarterback. So if the Saints feel that this is the move that they need to make, and they're willing to give up assets there that are proven commodities within the team in order to get that quarterback, whoever that quarterback might be, I could see the argument being made in favor of making the move for the quarterback, because that's the hardest position to replace. Then you add the Deshaun Watson part of it all, and then you just kind of have to make the decision if you're an NFL franchise based upon that additional information. But from that football standpoint of a quarterback or any other position around the team, it's probably going to be the quarterback. So I think it's too much, personally, depending upon who the players are, especially knowing that there might be that suspension still lingering there too, and how that couples with a lingering suspension or a looming suspension for Alvin Kamara that we'll learn more about it on April 25th when his trial goes up. It's a whole thing. So it's a complicated situation from just the compensatory standpoint, or the compensation standpoint, as opposed to the additional context that can also be layered when you're trying to tell, again, the whole story. So how does it all work? Can it happen in the first place? How do you even get his contract? How do you get any other quarterback's contract under the New Orleans Saints salary cap? Do you have to get rid of players in order to make that happen? Let's answer those questions as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. And if you want to make a bet for, let's say, the next starting quarterback for, I was going to say the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but Tom Brady's back. So if you want to take a look at how that adjusted, let's say the Super Bowl odds for 2022, for instance, you can head over and check out our friends over at BetOnline, who have all of those odds, lines, and props that you're looking for. And of course, it's tournament time. College basketball tournament is on the way. We get first game, just had Selection Sunday. We get our first 4 tomorrow, starting up tomorrow. So a ton for you to check out over at BetOnline. You can find them at betonline.net to get all of the news, analysis, podcasts, everything you need around sports betting. They've got you covered so that you can keep up with all the latest trends. You can head over on your mobile device or on your desktop. Doesn't matter. They've got you taken care of there. Beautifully newly designed website. You can get things like your favorite Vegas casino games, live betting, whole bunch of stuff available for you over at BetOnline, where the game starts. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a look at how to even make the mechanics of a contract for a quarterback that the New Orleans Saints could trade for, whether that be Deshaun Watson, Jimmy Garappolo, whomever, How to make it even work for the New Orleans Saints. So let's break that down. And so it said the legal tampering period as I'm recording is open. So I'm also keeping an eye on any moves for the New Orleans Saints. So far, nothing going on. Not a big surprise. I wouldn't be surprised to not see the Saints have anything happen during this legal tampering period because it's just simply not usually what happens with the New Orleans Saints. They might agree to terms with some smaller contracts like they did with Alex Arma last year, the fullback. They might re-sign a couple of guys, still waiting to see if the RFA tender gets put on Deontay Hardy, for instance, but that doesn't have to happen until Wednesday. So we'll keep an eye on it. We'll continue to keep you updated on it, and I'm continuing to watch as we go through. So how do you make a contract for Deshaun Watson, for instance, work if you trade for him? How do you make a contract for a guy like Jimmy Garappolo work if you trade for him? So the big question, that's a big question. And that is something that the New Orleans Saints can do. They could do that with Deshaun Watson. They could do it with Jimmy Garoppolo. They could do it with Patrick Mahomes if they needed to trade for Patrick Mahomes. There is a way to get it done. And the key word, say it with me, is, yep, you got it, restructure. That's the easiest way to do all this, right? So Deshaun Watson carries a base salary of $35 million going into 2022. If you look at a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo, for instance, I'm pulling up his contract right now, his won't be that much, but he does carry quite the cap hit because of his $24.2 million base salary. But those numbers can easily be restructured, knock them down to veteran minimum, which would be $1.035 million. And then in Deshaun Watson's case, you have a contract that's already built out until 2025. You can add one more void year out there, and then you take that nearly $33 million and you spread it out over the course of 5 years. And then you have your franchise quarterback through 2025 with a built-in, ready to be extended type of contract because of the void years. Same thing with Jimmy Garoppolo, but you don't have to commit as long-term if you don't want to, because this is the final year of Jimmy Garoppolo's deal. So you could take the just about $23 million, convert that into a signing bonus, drop his base salary to vet minimum at $1.035 million, and then you can take that $23 million and spread that out with a couple of void years. You can spread that into 2023 and 2024. You can extend that into 2025 without making any type of a long-term commitment to him, but you are agreeing to pay him for years or at least 1 year after he finally does depart, because the money would accelerate in terms of dead cap when it's time, when he leaves. So that is a big piece to all this. It's not like once he leaves, then all of a sudden you've just got $10 million or $8 million over the next 4 years that ends up getting paid off, or 3 years that ends up getting paid off. It all accelerates, right? So you have to be aware of all of that. But you can get that to fit under the salary cap. Let's say you take $33 million, you add a void year, you expand that to $5 million, you have a $1.035 million base salary plus a $6.6 million signing bonus hit, which is what that would end up being. You're looking at $7.635 million basically this season for a Deshaun Watson. We could do the math really quickly for a Jimmy Garoppolo too, but that's basically what you're looking at in terms of base salary plus signing bonus. And then there's all the other expenditures that can come in too, like roster bonuses, things like that. So with that being the case, for a guy like Deshaun Watson, who you would, if you're giving up all of these assets, 3 first-round picks, a couple of second-round picks, a starter, you're, as a franchise, hoping that that guy's going to be your starting quarterback for the next 10 years, right? So you don't mind restructuring the contract and pushing that money down the road because you've got TV deals coming. You've got gambling money coming to the NFL, which should spike the salary cap. But even on top of all that, you're already hoping to be able to commit to this guy for a while anyway. A Jimmy Garoppolo, for instance, where you're probably going to trade, like, I wouldn't trade anything more than a 4th-round pick and maybe a conditional 3rd next year. Like, I wouldn't go above Carson Wentz's deal, the Carson Wentz trade to get Jimmy Garoppolo. There, you're not really in a situation where you're giving up so much draft capital that you feel like you have to keep him around for 10, 15 years. You know what I mean? And you're not necessarily getting somebody in the peak of their career when it comes to Jimmy Garoppolo, who's going to be 31 years old in 2022. Whereas Deshaun Watson is going to be, 26, 25 in 2022. So that makes a big difference too when you're talking about a 6-year, 5-year difference between the two. He'll be 27. I apologize. He'll be 27 in 2022. So that's how you make the contract work. And that's one of the reasons why the Saints are, of course, in this conversation. They're going to see a lot of people who are going to say, oh, well, they're going to try to trade for X quarterback with what money? Money doesn't mean anything in this situation, because whatever that contract is, it's going to get restructured. It's going to get pushed all the way down. It's going to get pushed to much later. And hopefully the New Orleans Saints will be able to do that and then still have, because of that restructure, the money to spend in free agency to build around the player, because you're going to have to give up the draft capital in Deshaun Watson's case. Jimmy Garoppolo's case, you don't have to, but you're going to have to build all of that. So in the midst of all this, wouldn't it just be easier to re-sign Jameis Winston and move forward with maybe a really nice contract for him, better than he's going to get anywhere else, and then just build those terms the way that you want to build them so that it escalates, and then it's a backloaded contract, and then you still have your draft capital, and you still have effectively the same situation when it comes to salary cap space? Yes, it would be. But is that what New Orleans sees as the most successful move for their future? So far, we don't know, because they're exploring every single option that's out there. But the longer that they wait, and the longer that Deshaun Watson meets with this team and that team in the next 48 hours and all this other stuff, the more likely it is that Jameis Winston ends up somewhere else. So when you talk about, hey, Ross, what's the alternative to this? What is the other way that the Saints could go if they don't feel comfortable with the things around Deshaun Watson? It's Jameis Winston, it's Teddy Bridgewater, it's these free agent quarterbacks that they have access to and that they have familiarity with and that they have said are options. But right now, those guys are slowly distancing and slowly going to find new deals with new teams. And that could leave the Saints hang out to dry if they can't get these deals done, or make them so desperate that they trade away way too much to make any trade for a quarterback happen. All right, y'all, it is going to be a busy week here at Locked On Saints, and I do hope that you will continue to keep us locked here every single Monday through Friday and every day throughout the week. I'll probably have another episode up on multiple days, additional episodes based upon what's going on around the New Orleans Saints in free agency. Didn't really get a chance to do Mock Draft Monday because I thought the Deshaun Watson conversation was way too important, so I'll do another Mock Draft Monday for you. How about that? So we'll have a lot more coming up for you here throughout the week. Keep you up to date with everything going on around free agency and your New Orleans Saints. And if you want to, make sure that you are subscribed, that you're following, that you're doing all that so that you don't miss anything. Hit that notification bell on YouTube so you know when the newest episodes come up every Monday through Friday at least. Thanks as always for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to also go and check out for your second listen today, Locked On NFL Draft. They just did their Mock Draft Monday. They have a solution for the New Orleans Saints at quarterback. Is it the right one? Go and check them out. Eric Crocker, Ryan Tracy, nobody does it like them. And they're going to have some really exciting prospect interviews coming up here soon as well. So go ahead and check them out wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube as well. Thanks as always, making me a part of your day. I'll be back with you here again soon. And as always, or anything that you need around your New Orleans Saints between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.